at JP Chase. She currently leads design strategy for digital channels there and has worked in other diverse industries like advertising, finance, publishing, and entertainment. She's also spoken globally at conferences to shed light on the business impact of design, and with an emphasis on equal representation across all levels of corporate hierarchy. And moreover, she's got over 12 years experience crafting digital products with a passion for improving the human experience. So, let's give her a round of applause. Let's welcome Sharanya.
There are also seats, I believe, available for anybody who just walked in. So.
I'll wait for people to get situated. So hey everyone, Sharanya here, and today I'll be talking about design ethics. And before I jump right into it, I definitely want to extend a big thank you to Ring Station, to Brooklyn Product Design, Brian and Jose for sending an invite to speak at the event. If it's one thing that I really enjoy doing beyond just my day-to-day work is giving back to the community. So this is just my way of kind of sharing some of the learnings that I've kind of gained through the course of my career, and hopefully you guys can take away something meaningful from today's conversation. So before I jump right into what we're going to cover today, I definitely want to talk about the motivation behind wanting to speak about ethics, especially in the realm of design, because I think most of us in this room are in some way touching technology or working in design or an innovation of a creative capacity. And to me, like today and now is the moment to talk about it, right? With the advent of AI, we are entering a new frontier. So it's very important to me, and I think for all of us, to be very, very intentional about how we use technology and how we build technology products. And my hope is today talking about like some of the challenges and potentially some methodologies that have kind of worked in my experience. You guys can take that back in your own individual kind of companies and experiences and potentially implement that and see how that works out for you. So happy to have like a constructive dialogue afterwards. I'm definitely open to any sort of critical input and feedback, and don't hesitate to hold back. I want this to be like an interactive session, so if anybody feels like stopping midway and asking, let's do it. But let's try to keep questions towards the end, but if you feel like there's something pressing you want to ask or comment on, feel free. So with that, I want to get into, all right. I just want to talk quickly, and I think I'm going to look here because it's hard for me to look this way. And can you guys hear me fine? I mean, am I holding the mic too far, too close? Okay, great. So I think like I never quite put my career journey in my slide decks, and I don't know why. I just tend to speak for like 5 minutes about my career, and many times I realize that people are just not quite internalizing or not quite ingesting. So I've been told that please have a slide, some sort of vision that people can look at in terms of seeing your career trajectory. So this is just my attempt at it. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Of course, I'm happy to share out this entire slide deck for anyone who wants to take time and look at it. So in terms of my career, as Jose kindly mentioned, I've been working in design for over 12 years now. So it's been a really long time doing design. And as you all know, design as a discipline has really evolved over the years. So it's been very gratifying, very rewarding to see how the discipline has become extremely lucrative, right? Like I think when we all started in design, I don't know how long everyone collectively has been in this industry or in this discipline, but it wasn't as lucrative as it was a decade ago. I think over the last 4 to 5 years is when it's become extremely lucrative, but people have started to really see the value of what UX is or user experience and what design means when you're building technological products, right? So when I started my career, this was right out of grad school. I went to NYU for design, and my first gig out of school was at Microsoft Research, where I started as a design researcher, and we were working on a Connect game to transform classroom learning into a home environment. And if you can see the timestamp, that was in 2011, right? Like at that point, people were like, why would kids want to study at home? Like, why do you need like to transform classroom learning at home? And here we are in 2020, where that became almost like the norm. So to me, I think a lot of like the key moments in career have been very forward-thinking unintentionally, and that has been one of the things that I really hold on to as I think about design and as I think of myself as a design futurist, right? So that's what this tiny little astronaut on the right is kind of trying to symbolize. And then from there, I went on to be like founding designer, where I built a practice of design and design thinking within like a media company that didn't know what design meant. So that was a Mammothean task that I was taking. I don't know what I was thinking at that time that I could achieve this. Obviously, there were a lot of hurdles, and that would be a separate talk in itself. But all of that is to say that the product we built from ground zero went on to be the reason why the company got acquired and rebranded itself to be called Book Media. So it's a big badge of honor for me, because when we got into it as a team, all of us were like just figuring it out. It was like an extremely scrappy team. We didn't know what we were doing. But I think as you're making strides year over year, we were able to kind of make something that was productable. And I think by building a culture of customer centricity, it really changed how the company thought about like the bottom line. And then on going further along the trajectory, like I went on to like lead products in ad tech, and then from there, I now transitioned to finance. So I think the reason why I felt it important to mention the industries is because I think one of the things that I've been lucky or fortunate is to be able to work across different industries. And as a result of that, I feel like it has made me more holistic when I think about creative problem solving, right? Because when you work in the enterprise or the consumer side of things, the kind of problems are very different based on the business context. But once you have had that experience to work across the different industries, you find patterns and overlaps and strategies that you can cross-pollinate across those industries. And so today I lead design at Chase, where I oversee design for the mobile app experience, specifically around communication and messaging. And I've also been speaking since 2022, which has been a very new experience, but it has also been very humble and rewarding to be able to like explain and evangelize and socialize the value of design. Because when I speak in marketing conferences, many times people are like, oh, is design just moving pixels, or is it just like branding? And I'm like, not really. So I think a lot of it is the educational aspect of like wanting to like teach people why design exists and why does it have a place in a technology company and why does it have a seat at the table, or why it should. So that is a little bit about my journey. Hopefully that helps contextualize why you guys are listening to me, and hopefully some of the insights I share back is valuable. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, we're going to be talking about three broad topics. The first is, what exactly do we mean by design ethics? A lot of you might be hearing this for the first time or might be steeped into this a lot. I think it's good for me to like level set so that everyone has the same understanding from the way I look at it. Obviously, there are a lot of definitions for ethics. Like, I think it's a really complex topic and it's really hard to like capture that within 20 minutes, but I'm going to try my best to give you guys a very high level of what that means. And then what are the challenges that we face today, and what are some measures that we can take to course correct and potentially build a plan to take back and implement in our own companies, assuming that our companies are not doing enough yet. So stepping into what design ethics is. So I think the way I learned, I don't like reading like a block of text of definitions. Like, I usually like being told like what are the parameters that I'm working against when I'm thinking about a broader concept, right? So to me, when I think about design ethics, first and foremost, it is human-centered. And the reason why it's important to call it human-centered and not user-centered or customer-centered is because you need to add some meaning and weight and value behind who you're building for, because only when you add a person behind it and not a number or a metric, you're going to realize that you're building for someone who looks and talks like you, or potentially who doesn't look and talk like you at all, but has feelings and has emotions and has values that you need to be cognizant of, right, when you're building products. So it is kind of thinking about problem solving, but thinking about it more from a value-centered perspective. So it's a transition beyond just language, which is why I think ethics is so important to think about when you're building products. The second aspect of ethics is it prioritizes accessibility. And I'm sure a lot of us have heard accessibility as a term, and many a times in a lot of our companies, it's just like a training or a code of conduct, where people are like, this is a checkbox that I need to check off, and we do have accessibility training that we give once a year to everyone, right? But that's not enough, right? And I think the whole point of my talk today is to push us all collectively to challenge the status quo. When I say status quo, I mean the status quo of the organizations that we are working in, the systems that we are working in, because unless we have the balls to do it, we're not going to be able to push the executives to do it, and assuming not all of us have executive positions, we have to build army and rally and find people to kind of come together to be able to push back at corporations and people higher up who don't quite believe in this. And that kind of segues into the third kind of bucket, which is encouraging co-design. And to me, like, I'm a big proponent of building an army to kind of push for your agenda, because it's very hard to do anything alone. Like, I think even executives will tell you that the only way they're successful is by rallying people behind a cause and behind what they believe in, and that only happens when you're co-creating, when you're co-collaborating, be it a strategy, be it like a framework, be it like, wireframes that you're creating. It has to be with people that represent not just who look and talk like you, but also represent the fringes. And that's why I think building diverse teams becomes extremely important. And to me, like, I haven't mentioned that explicitly, but it is the implicit meaning behind co-design, that you have teams that are vastly different in terms of expertise and backgrounds. And then I want to go through each of these, but I think the ones that stand out is in terms of emphasizing agency when you're building for products, so ensuring you're empowering people that you're building products for in bettering their lives. And when I talk about agency, or when I talk about people feeling empowered using products, I think LinkedIn as an app comes to mind, and I think it's a really simple example, but I think even the aspect of like pulling up a QR code and having people scan your name to open up your profile, it's the most unintuitive thing ever. I've gone to conferences, and every time I've shown it to someone that's a boomer, they look at me like I just like created magic. And I'm like, and they're like, I feel so stupid that I never remember this. And I'm like, no, it's not you. It's the failure of the design that's not making you feel empowered. And to me, that's a big gap in solutioning. When like products are built, they're not thinking about like every demographic. They're not thinking about like the spectrum of savviness or proficiency with technology when they build products, right? So, and I'm sure there are a billion reasons why that they might have made that choice, but to me, that's a big gap when every second person I talk to forgets that that's where it is, because it's such a key aspect of the app when you're trying to connect with people. And the last is data privacy, which I think goes without saying. When you work in either like highly regulated industries, how your data is being used as a consumer is such an important question that a lot of people are asking, like especially Gen Zers, especially millennials, especially when it comes to financial products, but also when it comes to any products today. Like people are very, very, very curious about how their data is being used and whether it's being used in the right way. So to respect data privacy is a big aspect of ethics, which I think a lot of us should like really think about when we're building solutions or products. Now I know I've spoken a lot about what it is, and now a lot of you might be like, why should I really care? Why is it important in my day-to-day? And this again piggybacks on my motivation to talk about this topic, which is today more than any time with the proliferation of technology, more and more products are going to be connected. More and more people are going to be connected through technology, and it's even more imperative now than before for us to really keep ethics in mind. And we've seen that with AI. We've seen how biases affect how we use our products or how products impact people. We have seen like the Twitter storm that came about with the IBM bot that went about and all the slurs that were spewed out. So we don't want that to happen with products that we use on a daily basis, right? And even if you're working in a small startup, I think it still matters, because the impact that you have, you don't realize the tantamount or the trickle effect that you'll have as a collective society, right? So a lot of you might be like, I don't think I can do much in my tiny little office and my tiny little team, but trust me, that's how you make a sea change. I think every drop in the ocean makes a big difference, and I want all of us to think that we are being able to contribute and add valuable impact to society if we are being very intentional about the products we build. The second piece is, filter bubbles and information silos is a big reason why we should care. Like, we've seen that in politics, we have seen that in the environment, we have seen how information silos can cause people to completely change how they think about what's important. And this is more of a philosophical conversation, right? But that's where ethics becomes very important for all of us to really introspect and think about, like, what is the value in the products that we are building, and is it truly bettering people's experiences and lives, or is it actually detrimental to their daily jobs, right? And that's where I think it's a very honest question that we all have to ask ourselves when we go back to our day jobs, right? And I'm not here to pass judgment. Like, I just think, like, it's important, if people care, to really enhance and amplify the collective conscience of, like, how we think about products. And lastly, I think it goes without saying, I think if we don't build products keeping ethics in mind, more and more people are going to, there's going to be a big breakdown of trust, because your product or your company is going to get edged out by a competitor who actually cares about these causes. So, I think the real harm of unethical pursuits in design is how it manipulates agency and autonomy, and we do risk hindering our progress as a society. So, I think, to me, I think these are, like, really key aspects for why I care about it and why I try to instill that as a practice within my own team and organization. And I hope that those are reasons enough for you guys to want to actually care about it if you don't already. And I'm sure you guys do, but there might be some more on the cusp, so it's always good to level set. And so I think the bigger question is, how can we design and build products for a more inclusive world, right? I didn't grow up in this country. I mean, I'm sure that's pretty obvious from my accent. I grew up in India. I don't look and talk like the average person here. I'm a person of color, I'm a woman. So I'm already disadvantaged in a lot of regards, right, coming in. And I have to make the effort to fit in and use products and use services and use aspects that were not meant for me many times. And I think one very simple example is, I remember the first time I used Zoom. And I remember it was me, and it was my white friend or my coworker sitting next to me. And the Zoom screen was completely dark on my side of the screen, but it lit her face up just as well. And we were sitting next to each other. I had my laptop and she had hers. And I was like, wait, should I move? Is it something about my screen? Should I brighten my screen? And I didn't realize that it was the bias in the algorithm of how the software was built, that it didn't cater to people that had a different skin tone. So that's where biases start, where you are immediately made to feel excluded, right? Without intention. And that's when you realize that, okay, I am a minority. Products are not built keeping me in mind. And that's why, for me, it's even more important to talk about these things, because I do think that we need to build products that are inclusive, that are representative, so that everyone feels that they belong, right? And like I said, we are living in a world that's more connected, so I think it's important to be more value-centric and actually care about people you're building products for and how you're unintentionally disadvantaging people around you. So when we talk about inclusive design, and it is a methodology that it's been fairly new. And I say it's fairly new because only now am I seeing the larger corporations create teams to focus on this. And I think that could both be a good and a bad thing, because many a times companies do that as a measure of virtue signaling, where it's just like, hey, we have a team, we are like showing externally that we are focusing on this, but when it's boots on the ground, it's not really surmounting to anything meaningful when it comes to the products that they put out or the solutions that they put out. But I think the intention behind the methodology or the idea of it is still sound, which is that it is born out of digital environments that enable and draw on the full range of human diversity, right? And that's important, because when we think about inclusivity or when we think about accessibility, many a times people think that disability, when we talk about disability, accessibility is across a lot of different realms, but when we think about disability, a lot of people think of disability as the one on the left extreme, which is the permanent disability, right? When you've lost an arm, when you're blind, or when you've lost sight, when you've lost some sort of primary sense. But actually, all of us, at some point in time, have gone through each of these buckets, right? So when you think about a temporary or a situational disability, you could be multitasking and trying to make a payment, but also trying to tie your shoelaces, right? And at that time, there is a situational disability because you're not entirely focused on the one act that you're doing. Same with driving. You're driving, you can't afford to look at your screen entirely, so you're not giving it your 100% attention, and that's where the situational disability comes into play. And that's why it's important for us to build solutions that kind of cater to accessibility, because we are not just talking about accessibility across things that are permanent in nature, but we're talking about it across the spectrum of everything from something that could be temporary, like if you broke your limb and you're wearing a cast, which is temporary, to a situational disability like new parents when they have kids. So Kat Holmes, she came up with this notion of a persona spectrum that she built, which was then, and she wrote a book about it, which I would encourage all of those of you who are interested to purchase it and read it, because there's a lot of really valuable aspects and frameworks that she's shared, which can be brought back and implemented within your own kind of teams and corporations and organizations, which is this idea of disability and accessibility is a spectrum, and that when you think about it as a matrix across your 4 different primary senses, this is kind of a mapping of what are some examples of how disability could be perceived. So when you see this, you can see, I'm sure each of you falling in one of these buckets, right? And as a result of that, you realize that it's not building solutions for the fringes, it's actually building solutions for everyone. So she talks about this notion of solving for one and extending to many. And that's something that I have come to realize is a very important change of mindset when you're building solutions for your own company or for your own products or for the services that you are a part of. And it's fosters a sense of empathy, and it shows how a solution can scale across broader audiences, right? So that was the whole intention behind coming up with this framework, and then eventually Microsoft purchased the framework, and now Kat Holmes works with Microsoft Research to build out this as a practice within the organization. So I would say that there's a lot to think about when you think about accessibility and how you're building that as a practice within your organization. Another example that comes to mind is I remember going to a talk, and it was this female who started her own company called Fable, and the whole company, and I'll talk about that in a few slides ahead, but the whole idea of the company was that it builds an accessibility enterprise solution as a SaaS solution that companies can plug and play to check if their product is passing accessibility checks, and if not, it will suggest recommendations of what they can do. So to me, it was a very clever solution for companies that don't have the bandwidth to build this as a practice in-house. But the reason what motivated her was she was someone who suffered from vitiligo. And if you guys don't know what that is, it's a skin condition where you do have hyperpigmentation in your skin, and as a result of that, it's a genetic condition. You don't fall into the same spectrum of how all of us kind of navigate the world. And one of the more obvious experiences that she had was when she passes through TSA. And every time she goes through the body scanner, it bleeps because it doesn't recognize her skin as quote unquote normal. And she has to go through a touch test, and she's like, it's the most uncomfortable feeling because I'm immediately meant to feel not included and not normal. And she was like, I already feel that. I don't need to be reminded of that in every aspect of my life. And she was like, that was what motivated me to start the company, because I feel like not enough people are thinking about this. So to me, I was extremely inspired, and honestly, I credit her for me caring about ethics, if I'm being completely honest. So with that, like, I know I'm going a little fast because I know we're short on time, but I'll definitely pause for questions later. And like I said, happy to share this deck out with anyone who needs it. But yeah, jumping to the how, right? Like, I'm very outcome driven as a person. So when people tell me like, okay, ethics is a wicked problem and it's a complex problem, and like, we need to like, it can't be, we can't think about solutions, we have to think about questions, because it's all about reframing the problem. And to me, it's like, okay, sure, but I still need to know what I can do, you know? So I'm always thinking about practically what can be done. And of course, I'm not saying all of these you can just plug and play and apply in your own organizations. Of course, there is going to be an element of trial and error because every organization is different. And like I said, I'm happy to kind of have a discussion about it, but I can say like some of these sort of frameworks have worked well in my experiences, having worked in the different companies that I have and trying to build a practice of like design thinking and ethics. So happy to share some of those learnings, but I think I'm hopeful that some of these can be applied in your organization. So to kind of talk about like broadly 3 categories that I think are helpful to build an ethics first culture, because I think, and I didn't quite talk about this, I don't think one can build a practice of ethics without first building a culture that supports it. And I know that's a very hard pill to swallow, because that seems like a Mammothian task to like build culture, because it really depends on where you are in, you know, in the pecking order, right? But trust me, I have been a senior designer, or I've been a founding designer, and I've still managed to push. Not to say that a lot of you don't have your own challenges, but I'm here to tell you that it is possible. So don't think that you have to be a C-suite executive to be able to build culture, because culture is only built by the people who are working boots on the ground. And if anyone tells you otherwise, they're lying to you. So I think there are 3 big pillars when it comes to building culture. I think the first is design thinking, but doing it ethically. So ethical design thinking, from my perspective, is extremely important. I'll talk about what that is. The second is building diverse teams and leadership. It's critical to have executive support. While I'm saying that they solely can't, or rather you solely can't do it without executives, you have to have the backing, because you can push as much as you want, but if you don't have the executive backing, you're going to keep hitting the wall. And I've experienced that, and I've learned through my mistakes, and I've resolved to not work at companies where they don't value design. And that's just the fortune that I have to be able to do that, but I've worked in companies where that doesn't exist, and it's really hard to make a sea change. And the last but not the least is cross-functional co-designing. And that is extremely important, because without people, without your army, there's very little you can influence in terms of making a change in your company. So talking about like a culture of ethical design thinking, I think a lot of us have heard about what design thinking is, right? And I'm not here to give you a spiel about the whole process of design thinking, empathize, yada yada, because that's not, to me, like very actionable, if I'm being honest. But when I think about design thinking or ethical design thinking, a lot of it is democratizing decision making. And what that means is design, or the practice of creation or creative problem solving, shouldn't be relegated to just a section of people. It has to come from people across different disciplines, and that's why it's very important when decisions are being made, you have the right people in the room, you have the right representation across different quads in the room, and when decision is kind of democratized, you don't fall into the hippo model, which a lot of people know what that means, which is the highest paid person in the room speaks and gets their say, and that shouldn't be how the culture should be. So if that is how it works in your company, then you already know there's a big problem that you need to address. And you might alone not be able to do it, but you can do it with the support of your manager or with your team, who all rally behind the cause for pushing back and changing that, right? So